Hi, I'm Bryce Kaler.
Hi, I'm Zach Harris.
Hi, I'm Jordan Boudelier, and we are all graduate students at the University at Albany in the Forensic Accounting program. Today, we're creating this video to tell you about one of the fraud schemes we learned about, which is money laundering. We're going to start off with Bryce, who's going to give us a description.
So first of all, we need a description of what money laundering actually is. Money laundering addresses the means by which organized criminals take money from illegal sources and process it so that it appears as if it came from legitimate business sources. Generally, these are organized criminals because the crime is complex, involves many individuals, organizations, and fake businesses. It can involve crossing international borders. Note that when we are talking about money, we are talking about anything of value that can be easily transferred between individuals and entities that most people would accept as an item of value or as a form of payment for goods, services, and debts owed. A few examples of money could be digital currency, gold, diamonds, stock, and gift cards. As long as it has value, is an accepted form of payment, and is transferable among participants for a transaction, it can be characterized as money. So to prove money laundering, the government must demonstrate four things. First, the person accused of committing the crime, otherwise known as the defendant, reached an agreement with a buyer or seller and finances changed hands. The defendant knew that the proceeds derived from a specifically unlawful act. The property involved derived from a specifically unlawful act. And finally, that the defendant attempted to accomplish one of the following objectives. One, they wanted to promote a specified unlawful act or an SUA. They tried to conceal the nature, source, location, ownership, or control the proceeds of an SUA. They attempted to avoid federal reporting requirements, or they attempted to evade taxes. The most important thing to understand is that money laundering is a process. This process disguises the existence, nature, ownership, source, location, and/or dispositions of assets derived from criminal activity. I'm going to turn this over to Jordan, who's going to talk to you about the three phases of money laundering.
As Bryce said, money laundering is a process, and this process is composed of three key phases. First phase is placement, then followed by layering, and finally integration. Placement is when you get this money from illegal sources into the financial system without being noticed or detected by authorities. The next phase is layering, which hides and disguises the money. This is done so by creating a long and complicated process which moves the money to multiple places, including other businesses as well as other countries. The goal of layering is to conceal the true source and destination of the money. The final phase is integration, which converts the placed and layered money back to the initial perpetrator. It is important that this money is in a form that is not associated with the illegal actions. If the perpetrator fails to disassociate this money from illegal actions, this is known as dirty money, and the perpetrator could potentially face prosecution. Now I'm going to show you a video that I created that talks about one way in which you can commit money laundering.
This video is going to show you one of the ways in which you can commit money laundering. The first step is to put the money into a FedEx box, which typically holds about $200,000. Next step is to fly with the money to a foreign country, which will protect your privacy. Once in the foreign country, you set up a shell company, which is a fake business. Then you also create a bank account in this foreign country and deposit the money. Once all these steps are complete, you can fly home. Once home, you can borrow the money from the fake company you set up in the foreign country. Step 7 is to start a business that has a lot of cash transactions, such as a bar. You then fraudulently report this money from illegal sources as revenue through your cash-based business. cancel the loan, allowing you to keep the money. It is important to report the money as income to the IRS, which you will pay taxes on. Repeat this process as necessary in order to make funds from illegal sources appear as from legitimate business sources.
This video reinforces everything that we have talked about so far. Firstly, it shows that money laundering really is a process. This example includes 12 steps and also has elements of each of the 3 key phases. It places the money into the financial system, as well as hides the money and creates layers in order to conceal its true source, and then it is also converted back to the initial perpetrator in a manner that is not associated with the initial illegal actions where the money is from.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about some red flags and vulnerable industries when it comes to money laundering. So something that we might look for would be a cash business that is unusually profitable. So something that criminals might do to clean up dirty money is funnel it through a legitimate business. And they do that because they want to make it seem like they had actually earned that money. So if we find a business that's mostly cash-based and we see a lot of false sales that didn't actually happen or transactions that are like way overpriced, that would be something we'd look for because, again, they're trying to make it seem like they had actually earned that money when they didn't. Another thing that we look for is transactions that are structured to be directly below what's called a currency transaction report. And what that is anytime that a bank receives more than $10,000 in a day from any individual person, they have to report it to a government agency. And if you're laundering money, you don't want the government to know about that. So you might try to split up your payments so they're below $10,000. So if you have to deposit $20,000, instead of all in one day, you might take $5,000 and spread it out over 4 days. And we would look at that and find it a little odd because it seems like they're structured in a way to avoid detection instead of just being all deposited in one day. Another thing we might look for are cryptocurrencies. Now, cryptocurrencies are things like Bitcoin that you might have heard about, and they're completely virtual. They don't actually exist. So they're very difficult to track, and they're designed to be anonymous. So it's very easy to pay for criminal products and services with virtual currency. Another industry that's kind of vulnerable would be casinos or horse racing or really any kind of gambling, because it's a lot easier to falsify like the amount of money you won gambling. You can go to a casino, buy a bunch of chips, hang out for a couple of days, and then just cash in those same chips and walk away with a check from a casino. When you deposit it in the bank, you just point back to the casino and say you won at gambling. Another big red flag would be a shell company. A shell company is just literally the shell of a company. So there's no operations, there's no physical location, there's no employees, like it only exists on paper. And there are legitimate reasons to have a shell company, but if you're laundering money, they're very helpful because they don't actually exist, but you can still transfer money into and out of them. So when it comes to layering the money and sending it all over the place and making it hard to track, a shell company is something that's very useful. And it's something that we'd like to pay attention to. And finally, there are financially secretive countries like the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Hong Kong. If you've heard about like a Swiss bank account, the reason that's so infamous is because Switzerland is famous for not revealing the identities of people who have accounts in their country. And when you think about the currency transaction report, that might not be something that happens in Switzerland. So if you have an offshore bank account for no good reason, that would be something we want to look into. And
So one of the toughest parts about deterring money laundering is that you are dealing with people who do not care about abiding by the law. Still, it is important to recognize anti-money laundering regulations and laws that are intended to prevent criminals from committing money laundering. One of the principal goals behind money laundering laws and regulations is that of seizure, meaning to deprive the criminal of the use of their ill-gotten gains. The Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 established requirements for record keeping and reporting by private individuals, banks, and other financial institutions. It was designed to help identify the source, volume, and movement of currency and other monetary instruments transported or transmitted into or out of the United States or deposited in financial institutions. Second, the Money Laundering Control Act of 1986 was the first time that money laundering itself was considered a prosecutable offense, meaning it is a federal crime. The MLCA has been amended over the years to strengthen the laws and eliminate various loopholes that criminals use. Third, the Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act, also known as RICO, looks to address the organizations involved in a money laundering scheme. Racketeering refers to the act of acquiring of a business through illegal activity, operating a business with illegally derived income, or using a business to commit illegal acts. The RICO Act increases the severity of penalties for offenses charged under the statute. RICO provides for criminal penalties up to $25,000 and 20 years in prison. Finally, the USA Patriot Act was passed in Congress in 2001 after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Title III of this act identifies new types of money laundering crimes and increased the penalties associated with them. The felony penalty for a bulk cash smuggling is 5 years. Furthermore, the attempted transport of more than $10,000 in currency or monetary instruments into or out of the country is illegal if the funds are concealed and the transporter was attempting to avoid the U.S. federal reporting requirements. Under federal law, all property in money laundering are forfeitable. If money laundered is mixed with monies generated from legitimate sources, all the funds are subject to confiscation. All of these laws work to deter people from participating in criminal activity. I'm now going to turn it over to Jordan, who is going to speak about the ways money laundering is detected.
As Bryce said, the deterrence of money laundering can be difficult as the people who commit it are already criminals. This places a huge emphasis on the detection of money laundering. The initial detection of money laundering can be triggered by the recognition of red flags, such as those described by Zach earlier in this presentation. The detection of money laundering also relies heavily on the ability to determine where the money starts and stops. This is usually the same place, and if you're able to determine one, you can either look forward or trace back the trail in which the money was laundered. The money laundering scheme is vulnerable to detection at each of the 3 phases that we talked about earlier. It is vulnerable at the placement stage at the domestic entry into the financial system, and also in the layering stage when the funds are transferred abroad, and finally in the integration stage when the money is transferred back to the original country. The detection of money laundering has also been made harder with the emergence of new advanced technologies that can be used in money laundering. An example of this is Hawala, which allows for the transfer of funds without the actual physical movement of money. However, there has also been new advanced technologies that allow for greater detection. Some of these include data analytics techniques. It's also imperative for countries to work together. This has been more prevalent in a post-9/11 society because terrorist organizations are one of the main groups that use money laundering in order to fund their organization.
So now that you've learned a little bit more about money laundering, I'm going to walk you through a real-world example. In this case, it's called the Black Market Peso Exchange, and it's a huge money laundering scheme that was created back in the 1980s by a guy named Pablo Escobar. It's a little complicated, but I'm going to walk you through it step by step. First thing we want to pay attention to are the 3 different players in the scheme. There's the Medellin cartel, there's a Colombian businessman, and there are Colombian brokers. The cartel are making a whole lot of US dollars and they want Colombian pesos. The Colombian businessmen are the exact opposite. They have a lot of Colombian pesos, but they want US dollars. And the brokers are just the middlemen between the cartel and the businessmen. The brokers are also the one laundering the money, which is what we're going to get to. So first off, the cartel makes the money in the United States. This is where all the dirty money is produced in the first place. The cartel doesn't really want to deal with laundering the money, so they sell it to Colombian brokers in exchange for pesos. At this point, the cartel is out of the game. They got rid of the money, they got their pesos, and they're good to go. Now, the Colombian brokers have all the US dollars and they have to clean it and launder it so they can sell it to Colombian businessmen. They do this by hiring a whole bunch of agents throughout the United States. These agents are just citizens or they're visiting, and all they do is open small bank accounts all over the United States. This is in order to avoid detection by that cutoff, that $10,000 cutoff that I was describing earlier. So instead of depositing $100,000 into one account, which would trigger a report, they deposit $1,000 into 100 accounts to avoid detection. So once this money is placed in those accounts, the agents will sign a whole bunch of checks and they will mail them back to the Colombian brokers. So now the Colombian brokers have a whole bunch of blank checks, which they sell to the Colombian businessmen. So the businessmen have signed checks from random US bank accounts that they can now spend on pretty much anything they want. They're international businessmen, so they have debts that they might have to pay in US currency, or maybe they just want to buy goods and service from the United States. In any case, the businessmen have their money and the cartel have their pesos, and the brokers are the one that organized the transaction between the two, and they cleaned up the money through all of these agents. So that's pretty much how it goes. It's just like a circular flow back and forth between the cartels and the businessmen. And it's a good case to look at because it highlights why different countries really need to cooperate with each other between the United States and Colombia to actually catch all these guys. And also the importance of the currency transaction reports, because it makes it really difficult to actually place the money into US bank accounts. It forces them to split it up amongst a bunch of different accounts. So that pretty much does it for this example. And I think now we're going to move on to some trivia.
Now we're going to give you 5 quick questions to test your knowledge about money laundering.
What is the goal of money laundering? A, to take money from illegal sources and process it so that it appears as if it came from legitimate business sources. B, to spend money as quick as possible. C, to get money in a physical form. Or D, to steal money from criminals. The correct answer is A, to take money from illegal sources and process it so that it appears as if it came from legitimate business sources.
The second question is, which of the following words is best used to describe money laundering? A, prosperous, B, process, C, proceeds, or D, prospect? The correct answer is B, process.
The third question is, which of the following are phases of money laundering? A, placement, B, layering, C, investigation, D, A and B, or E, all of the above? The answer is D, both placement and layering.
When did money laundering become a prosecutable offense? A, it always has been a prosecutable offense. B, upon the passage of MCLA. C, when RICO was established. Or D, none of the above. The correct answer is B, upon the passage of MCLA.
The final question is, who typically commits money laundering? A, mobsters, B, organized crime groups, C, terrorists, or D, all of the above? The answer is D, all of the above.
Here are the results. If you got 0 to 1 questions correct, with a little bit of extra research, you can definitely become a fraud examiner.
If you got 2 to 3 questions correct, you are showing promising characteristics of a fraud examiner.
And if you got 4 to 5 questions correct, you're a future all-star fraud examiner in the making.
If you want a little bit more information, there are a couple of really good YouTube videos you can check out in the sources below. And if you want to catch money laundering and the media, you can check out these shows on Netflix: Narcos, Breaking Bad, Ozark, and Sons of Anarchy.
We really hope you enjoyed our presentation on money laundering today and learned a little bit about it.